Many people believe designing the scrap trap was because he got burned in the fire of FNAF 3 and needed a new suit to return in FNAF 6. Seems pretty believable and open shut, right? Well, wrong, because the secret ending in FNAF 3 actually shows us Springtrap get up after the fire and he's not missing any parts to his suit at all. Therefore, why would he need a new one? And if you needed even more proof, Scott Coffin himself actually says there's an in-game lore reason as to why his design changes. And for us to solve this mystery, my friends, we're gonna have to dig extremely deep.
Ah, you don't come back? Only I can pull that off.
If you look at the two designs together, you can clearly see in the original, there isn't much of a body behind Springtrap, whereas in Scrap Trap, you can clearly see William Afton's body. And that's the really confusing part. And if any of you are just a little bit confused as to what's going on here, let me explain it for you. In the ending of FNAF 3, Fazbear Frights, the entire scare house or maze, whatever you want to call it, burns to the ground with Springtrap inside of it. The next time Springtrap / William Afton turns up is in FNAF 6 or the Pizzeria Simulator, and he has a completely new design. Now, we also see other animatronics turn up in FNAF 6, and they have also claimed. We see Circus Baby make a return in FNAF 6 as Scrap Baby, and that's a reasonable redesign / change, because we know she was part of Enid after Sister location, they all absorb into one. Eventually though, Baby gets ejected from Enid, and that's how she becomes Scrap Baby. She pieces herself back together with scraps from other animatronics. That is a logical explanation, but there doesn't seem to be a logical explanation for William Afton putting himself back together after the fire of FNAF 3. Like I said, we see him get up, his suit looks intact, and the suit is only the first bit of this puzzle, because the other piece of this puzzle is his actual body inside of the suit, well, inside of Scrap Trap. That wasn't present at all in Springtrap. So has he suddenly decided to start drinking loads of milk now and regrow all his bones and everything inside of Scrap Trap? The real interesting thing for me on Scrap Trap's design is that the snout is clearly one of Freddy's, and the bottom jaw, well, the only bottom jaw I can see that would resemble is from a nightmare. But how would that even be possible? Because they're the only ones which seem to have them type of sharp teeth. But they are literally that, just nightmares. And that would predate all of this anyway. And not to mention another huge detail here. If he was just burned in the fire of FNAF 3, then he'd be all charred and burnt to a crisp, right? Well, that doesn't seem to be the case. And the new costume definitely seems to be funky fresh, which tells me obviously he has changed out of his costume from FNAF 3, because otherwise he'd be charred and burned. Now, some people have theorized that this is a second person, a second Spring Bonnie suit, because if you think back to the mini games and cutscenes of FNAF 4, we see a guy put on a Spring Bonnie suit with brown hair and shut the door. Later on, we then see a guy slumped over in this suit in a back room with a tuft of brown hair sticking out. The conclusion to this is that William Afton killed that guy in the original Spring Bonnie suit, and that is the body we see in the FNAF 6 Springtrap. I mean, the design of the FNAF 6 Springtrap definitely resembles the toy animatronics from FNAF 2, you know, with the muzzle, the buck teeth, very much a strong resemblance to Toy Bonnie. And we know William wasn't killing mindlessly. He wanted to experiment with Remnant, potentially make himself immortal, expand his own lifespan. He's a scientist, and as we can see from this Easter egg here, we see Scrap Trap, and it says Mad Science with Dr. Scrap Trap. So is it possible then that the FNAF 3 Springtrap was too damaged from the fire, which we didn't initially see, meaning William had to instead transfer his soul into this other Spring Bonnie, which he'd killed all them years ago? It'll explain the new suit and how the body is in this new suit when it wasn't present in the old one. This is then further backed up by William himself giving us a line in Pizzeria Simulator where he says,
"You may not recognize me at first, but I assure you, it's still me."
Now granted, that could also be used to the fact that because he changed his suit design with new parts, you may not recognize him, but I don't believe that to be the case. The fact that he says you may not recognize me at first is obviously indicating about his appearance. You can clearly tell that's still a Spring Bonnie, but the person inside of it, they might be thinking isn't William Afton. That's why he says you may not recognize me at first, but it's still me. Because it's a different person entirely. It's not William Afton, the original body, it's this other person who was inside of it. William Afton has just taken control of the suit, and the body was inside of it. He's transferred his soul, leaving his old body and his old suit behind. I mean, you've only got to look at the two suits side by side, the FNAF 3 Springtrap and the FNAF 6 Springtrap. FNAF 6 Springtrap has feet. legs. The original doesn't, and it would actually look like the FNAF 6 Springtrap has put their legs inside of it, like a real man in a real suit. William Afton in FNAF 3 didn't have any legs, not by the looks of it anyway. And no matter how much milk you're gonna drink, is not gonna regrow your legs. But you might be thinking, well, Twisty, he was experimenting with Remnant, and just like Mike, is it possible that he regenerated these limbs, regenerated his skin inside of a new suit? Now, I'd like to point out here that Remnant doesn't regenerate anything. It heals, yes, doesn't regenerate. And the fact of the matter is, if William did have Remnant in there, which regenerates anything, why would he have rotted in the first place in Springtrap? Doesn't make sense. So if anyone says that Remnant was used and regenerated his skin, his body parts into this new FNAF 6 scrap trap, that doesn't fit the law, doesn't make sense. Don't get me wrong, that would have made my job so much easier in this theory, and I could have just said, yeah, Remnant regenerated him. Easy fix, win, job done, video over. And also would have made it much easier to tie everything back together, but nope, that isn't the case, I'm afraid. But here's the really interesting and confusing bit, because in FNAF 6, we actually hear Springtrap's heart beating as if he's alive. How is that even possible, indicating as if he's alive? And if he did regenerate, why is he still missing an arm in Scrap Trap? And thinking back again to the secret ending of FNAF 3, we see Springtrap get up, and here is the really interesting part. Canonically, after he survives the fire of FNAF 3, he's called Dark Springtrap. Scott himself even references this and talks about him as Dark Springtrap in an official context. There's also merch of Dark Springtrap, clearly showing that he made it out of the fire pretty intact. Although the suit itself is probably heavily damaged as a whole, and he probably realizes he shouldn't even be alive at this point. Just a point to note here, this also gives meaning to the actual character Dark Springtrap, because it's seen in the character encyclopedia, and there's also a full page dedicated to it. I'd always wondered why, because we never really see it. That answers the question. After this fire, like I said, he realizes he's more damaged than he's letting on. That suit is probably melting, falling off, completely black and charred. There's no way he can reuse that suit. His body is severely damaged, if not even present, and completely rotted at this stage. There wouldn't be any human skeleton left underneath it for him to even climb into a new suit, let alone get pieces of scrap to put on his new body. It makes sense that William Afton was farming Remnant. We know that. That's basically his entire goal. He wants to make himself immortal. And the only logical explanation I can think of as to how he's regrown his entire body in an original, what looks like Spring Bonnie costume, is the original individual we see in that FNAF 4 cutscene, in the original Spring Bonnie costume. He transfers his consciousness, his spirit, into this animatronic Springlock costume, which just so happens to have a dead body inside of it. William Afton will find a way to come back. He always does. He always comes back.
I always come back.
Scott said himself that he made FNAF 6 as a way to bring the story together, to make sure everyone understands it. And Scrap Trap's design had a low reason, and we just hadn't figured that out until today. But the one thing which still puzzles me is his beating heart. And the fact of the matter is, Scott could have just used the Dark Springtrap design anyway in FNAF 6. So the fact that he had changed it to this Scrap Trap tells me either A, it's a new person, or as the name implies, William did remove his old Spring Bonnie costume and replace it with scrap, other bits and pieces. But it's worth mentioning here that Scrap Trap was a name given to this character by the fans, because initially in the game and in the game credits, it was just called William Afton. Scrap Trap came later by the fans. The official reason is unknown, but Scott Cawthon himself denied to explain the design and basically just said it was a law question. But personally, on what I've just said, I speculate that it's either A, he did transfer himself into this other body, this other Springtrap, which we've seen in FNAF 4, which is canon, or he simply just added parts to an already decaying exoskeleton. But that doesn't answer the human body inside of it, or the regrowth, etc. of limbs. So I quite like the idea that he's transferred his soul into this other Spring Bonnie. I'd also like to say thank you for watching the video, and if you enjoyed this, hit the like button, it really does help me out, and subscribe for plenty more FNAF content, because there's loads coming on the channel. I'd also like to ask you the question, why does Chica take off her beak, and why does Roxy get stuck under a forklift? The answers are in the other videos on my channel. I highly recommend checking them out. I'm Twisty from Twisted Animatronic. Stay safe out there, superstars.